Imagine this: a woman still breathing, still conscious, her jaw being carefully reconstructed, not smashed in rage, not broken by accident, surgically altered bone sliced at perfect angles, rewired with bronze so that when she tries to scream, when she needs to scream, her own body betrays her. The sound that escapes her throat is neither human nor animal, something between a growl and a child's desperate cry. A sound engineered to be unrecognizable forever. And this wasn't punishment for treason. It wasn't vengeance for murder. This was what happened to women who belonged to the wrong family, in the wrong century, under the wrong empire. Welcome to Whispered Histories. I'm your host. If you're drawn to the stories that expose how power corrupts and reshapes the very idea of suffering itself, if you want to understand how far humans will go to preserve control, then stay. Leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I ask because I'm genuinely curious what draws people into this darkness. Because what you're about to hear isn't a tale for comfort. These are not bedtime stories. They are testimonies, accounts that demand to be remembered, no matter how much we might wish to look away. Between 911 and 609 BCE, something catastrophic unfolded in the heart of Mesopotamia. An empire didn't just conquer land or enslave people. It refined terror into a philosophy, a system so calculated that fear itself became a form of governance. This was the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a civilization that turned cruelty into administration and suffering into policy. And nowhere was this dark sophistication more precisely engineered than in how they treated women. Not all women, only those who mattered most. Queens, princesses, daughters of rival kings. Women whose very bloodlines symbolized legitimacy, whose names appeared in treaties, whose births represented political threats. These women weren't merely individuals. They were symbols, living emblems of rival empires and the possibility of rebellion. To the Assyrians, symbols like these were dangerous, but executing them swiftly would have been far too merciful and far too simple. The Assyrians understood something chilling. Death ends things. Death provides closure. But terror lingers. It stretches endlessly forward. The palace archives unearthed in the ruins of Kalhu reveal the extent of this horror. Thousands of clay tablets carefully inscribed, methodically catalogued. They describe acts that historians spent decades trying to translate, not because the language was hard, but because the content defied comprehension. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't sadism for its own sake. It was organized. It was bureaucratic. It was policy. The Assyrian Empire had discovered something that changed the logic of cruelty forever. If you could document terror, you could replicate it. If you could systematize it, you could control populations without ever drawing a sword. And the victims who best demonstrated this philosophy were women living warnings that told the world what happened. To those who defied empire, these are their stories. These are the voices that refused to disappear. Between 911 and 609 BCE, something philosophically devastating took root in the heart of Mesopotamia. An empire didn't just seize lands or enslave populations, it perfected the art of control through fear. The Neo-Assyrian Empire didn't simply want obedience, it wanted awe. It wanted submission so complete that rebellion itself would feel unnatural. And nowhere did this new philosophy of domination reveal itself more clearly than in its treatment of royal women, those of power, of lineage, of symbolic importance. Not every woman suffered this fate. Only those who mattered politically: queens, princesses, daughters of rival kings. Women whose very existence whispered of alternative power. Their lives, their beauty, their names represented competing bloodlines. Dangerous reminders that legitimacy could flow from more than one source. For the Assyrians, that was intolerable. The solution was not a simple execution. A death sentence was too merciful, too final. A dead woman could become a martyr, but a living warning, a breathing, altered monument of pain could endure for generations. This was not vengeance. This was policy, a calculated doctrine of terror without death. In the palace archives of Kalhu, archaeologists unearthed tablets so precise, so disturbingly methodical, that historians struggled to categorize them. They weren't myths. They weren't judicial records. They were manuals, administrative blueprints of suffering. Consider the case of Elani, documented in tablets, uncovered in 1843 by Claudius Rich and later studied by Kirk, Grayson and Simo Parpala. Elani was a princess of Elam, a neighboring empire that had dared to defy Assyrian authority. When her father's revolt failed, she was not executed. She was surrendered not as a prisoner, not as a slave, but as a message. Her existence was rewritten to serve as a living symbol of what defiance cost. Her punishment began with something deceptively small, the removal of status markers. To the Assyrians, this wasn't simple humiliation. It was a ritual erasure. In Mesopotamian culture, a woman's jewelry, her hairstyle, even the fabric of her clothing spoke her rank and power. Over 3 long months, Elani was stripped of those symbols, not violently, ritually. Each jewel was removed one by priests chanting prayers to Ishtar, goddess of love and war. They prayed for her continued health, because they needed her alive. They always needed them alive. Her hair was shorn every week by the same palace barber, until the act itself became a ritual. And here lies one of the darkest truths of psychological control. When pain becomes routine, it stops feeling like cruelty. It begins to feel like law. Trauma happens once, but repetition rewires the mind. Over time, even resistance starts to fade, and acceptance becomes the empire's victory, the quiet triumph of habit over hope. But the physical alteration came next, the step that forever separated Assyrian cruelty from any other ancient brutality. Elani's face was reassembled, the bridge of her nose deliberately fractured, and set wrong, so subtly wrong that it healed, just enough to make her unrecognizable, even to those who once loved her. This wasn't barbarism. It was surgery, done by palace physicians, skilled, methodical, coldly professional. The breaks were clean. The healing was monitored. Medicines were applied to prevent infection. She was kept alive, kept healthy, because her survival was the point. When the bone had mended, her transformation continued. The skin around her eyes was tattooed with black, unyielding symbols, administrative markings that recorded her as a woman who had defied empire. The ink, made of mineral ash and oil, was meant to last forever. Each morning when she saw her reflection, she wasn't looking at herself anymore. She was reading her biography etched into her skin. But Elani wasn't starved or left to rot. She was fed, bathed, and treated with care. Her body preserved like a museum exhibit, because when her transformation was complete, she wasn't hidden away. She was displayed. Her new home was a chamber beside the throne room, not for comfort, but for demonstration. Ambassadors, generals, and nobles were made to walk past her open door. No one explained who she was. They didn't have to. The sight of her beautiful once, now surgically unmade, spoke volumes. Historian Mario Liverani calls this the weaponization of the body, not as a tool of war, but of diplomacy. Every scar, every tattooed mark, every restructured bone was a paragraph in a political text, a living warning carved in flesh. The message was silent but clear. This is what rebellion looks like. This is what defiance becomes. But Elani's story was only the beginning. In 642 BCE, when King Ashurbanipal conquered the Elamite capital of Susa, he didn't just take gold or slaves, he seized symbols. He captured 4 daughters of King Tumen, royal women whose only crime was being born into the wrong bloodline. They had never held a sword, never made a political decree, but their existence alone was dangerous. Proof that another empire once had power. What happened to them was documented with terrifying precision. Letters, reliefs, administrative tablets. The Assyrians recorded everything. Upon capture, the sisters were given new names, not insulting ones, names that meant nothing. Empty administrative labels designed to erase identity. Modern psychology would call it linguistic annihilation. Because when your name disappears, the world forgets who you are, and soon you forget too. The sisters were then separated, each confined to a different palace section. Not for security, for isolation. Without shared words, without shared memory, their sisterhood dissolved. Their bond was part of what the empire needed to break. Then came the next phase, something the records call the reconfiguration of form. Surgeons, artisans, and tattooists, those who once adorned kings, were tasked to unmake these women. For 6 long months their hair was completely removed. Their scalps burned with caustic paste so that it would never grow back. In Mesopotamia, a woman's hair wasn't decoration, it was identity. Now they had none. Their shoulders were tattooed, with slave markings, patterns once reserved for livestock. A silent declaration, you are property now. Their feet were bound, tight enough to make walking painful but not impossible. Every step a reminder of their subjugation. Pain became normal. Silence became survival. They were exhibited in palace courtyards, always standing, never seated. Sculptures recovered centuries later show them frozen in stillness, eyes hollow, bodies motionless. Art historians once mistook those carvings for idealized figures. They weren't. They were records, stone testimonies of living ghosts. Perhaps the most chilling of all Assyrian punishments was a practice known as the 1,000-day dissolution. It was reserved for royal women who refused to accept Assyrian dominance, those who clung to loyalty for a fallen family. It began with public humiliation. The woman was stripped of clothing, not for lust, but for erasure. Before a gathered crowd, scribes read her royal titles aloud, and then erased them, chiseled from stone tablets as witnesses watched. Then the slow dismantling began. For 1,000 days exactly, she lived as a tool of suffering. Each day brought one of 3 tasks. On the first, she cleaned the palace latrines, crawling beneath floors, scraping waste with wooden tools until her hands bled. On the next, she worked in the tanneries, mixing hides in vats of urine and lime. Her skin blistered, her fingernails dissolved. Still, she worked. Then came the fields. She spread waste as fertilizer under the open sky, visible to all who passed. Her clothes dyed in mock royal colors, cheap, cruel imitations of her former glory. Her meals were measured cruelty, barley bread laced with chaff that cut her throat, salted water that left her perpetually thirsty. Physicians watched her health like accountants tracking assets. She could not die. Death would rob the empire of its message. And then, after the 1,000th day, she was released. Not freed, released, given her name back, now meaningless. Given papers of status, now worthless. Given food for 1 month, and sent into a world that no longer recognized her. No one would take her in. Her body, scarred and altered, marked her forever. She was a ghost among the living, evidence that survival could be worse than death. The cruelty of the Assyrians wasn't random, it was structured. Every act of pain served a purpose. Every scream a calculated function in the machinery of power. What made their system truly terrifying wasn't just the violence, but the bureaucracy behind it. The Assyrians kept records, meticulous clinical records. They didn't hide their cruelty. They documented it, codified it, and archived it for future governors to replicate. In the ruins of Nineveh and Kalhu, archaeologists uncovered tablets that read like medical case files. Physicians' notes described intentional fractures, supervised healing, and controlled disfigurement. One tablet from the reign of Sargon. 2 instruct surgeons to set a captive's broken face so that it healed. Naturally, though wrongly. It wasn't meant to look deliberate. The uncertainty itself was part of the punishment. Had she been cursed by the gods? Had she deserved this? Or had fate simply chosen her? That ambiguity haunted the victims far longer than the pain ever could. To the Assyrians, suffering wasn't the end goal. It was control through narrative. A perfect empire didn't just break bodies, it rewrote minds. And so these records became manuals, handbooks of terror, passed through generations of administrators. When Babylon rose after Assyria's fall, its kings studied these methods. They didn't imitate them perfectly, but the ideas endured. The notion that punishment could be endless, that it could be psychological, that terror could outlive the torturer, those concepts spread like infection through centuries of empire. But history rarely leaves only the records of the powerful. Sometimes it preserves whispers, hidden, fragile, human. In 612 BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire collapsed. The palaces of Nineveh burned. Fire consumed archives that had taken decades to create. Statues toppled, walls crumbled. And in that chaos, something remarkable happened. The women still imprisoned within the palace. Walls, those few who had survived their transformations, escaped. Centuries later, archaeologists sifting through the rubble discovered small clay fragments, buried beneath stones. Not official records, not scribal documents, but crude tablets scrawled in Aramaic, the language of commoners. They were shaky, untrained, written by hands that had never held a stylus before. Yet their words cut deeper than any royal decree. One reads, "They call me nobody. My hands are no longer mine, but I was here. I existed." Another fragment whispers, "They said my voice disappeared because the gods abandoned me. I think the gods left because they could not bear to listen." And another, barely legible, "They broke my hands. Now I write with my broken hands. Let that be proof of what I survived." These weren't letters to anyone. They were witnesses, self-made monuments of existence, created by those the empire had tried to erase. Modern scholar Stephanie Daly calls them the earliest examples of testimony as resistance. The act of saying, "I lived," even when no one is listening. Modern science has confirmed what those women wrote. In 2003, forensic anthropologists studying skeletons near Kalhu found fractures that matched Assyrian surgical descriptions, clean breaks, healed at deliberate angles. The evidence wasn't myth, it was procedure. Even the art of the empire, the grand reliefs, once thought to be symbolic, proved to be documentary. Each carving was a case study in stone. One figure with an altered face, another bald, her scalp scarred, another marked with tattoos. They were not depictions of captives. They were records of suffering, visible proof carved into walls to say, this happened, and it will happen again. To the Assyrian court, cruelty was not shameful. It was sacred, a monument to order, and that is perhaps the most horrifying truth. They wanted everyone to know. Every wound was meant to be seen. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about visibility, the empire's confidence that no one could stop them. Modern historians see in this a terrifying level of psychological sophistication. The Assyrians understood 4 dimensions of control: physical, breaking the body; social, displaying the broken as warnings; temporal, making suffering last beyond its purpose; and psychological, convincing the victim she deserved it. The ultimate cruelty wasn't pain, it was belief. If a woman began to believe that her suffering was divine justice, then the empire had won not just her body, but her soul. After Nineveh's fall, the empire's methods did not die. Other kingdoms, Babylon, Persia, Rome, borrowed fragments of the Assyrian philosophy. Empires learned from empires, cruelty learned from precedent. But something else survived too: the women. Historical fragments tell us that some of them formed small, hidden communities outside the ruins. They lived in exile, yet not silence. Together, they rebuilt stories where their pain was no longer divine punishment, but proof of injustice. In that act, they began to heal. Some became healers themselves. Some became priestesses in temples devoted to goddesses of renewal and rebirth. Their scars became sacred symbols of endurance. Archaeologists even discovered a forbidden shrine in the ruins of Asher, a hidden chamber filled with small bone figurines, each shaped like a woman in prayer, or sleep, or mourning. These figurines were handled so often their surfaces had worn smooth. Scholars believe they were used in secret rituals of remembrance, a way for enslaved women to reclaim what had been taken from them. It was resistance through ritual, faith forged from pain. Even in a world built to erase them, they had found a way to exist. The Assyrian Empire is dust. Its walls crumble beneath desert sands, but the ideas it created, those survive, because ideas are harder to kill than empires. The Assyrians believed that humanity was hierarchical, that some lives were threats simply by existing, and that control required visible suffering. Look closely at the modern world, and you'll still see echoes of that logic in systems that surveil, that label, that punish identity itself. History doesn't repeat, it mutates. But the question remains, how do we build power without cruelty? How do we create systems that don't rely on the degradation of others to function? In the winds that blow through the ruins of Nineveh today, locals say you can still hear voices, whispers that sound like weeping. Scholars call it superstition, but maybe it's something more. The echo of memory, because trauma leaves traces, not just in bodies or ruins, but in the air itself. The women of Assyria are long gone, their bones dissolved, their names erased, but their defiance, their existence, survived in clay. They refused to disappear, and by remembering them, so do we. Thank you for walking through this darkness with me, for listening to what was never meant to be heard again. Every view, every comment, every listener who refuses to forget, you become part of their resurrection. This was Whispered Histories. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, history's darkest stories aren't just about the past. They're warnings about what we could become again.
Whispered Histories. Some voices never die.